Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Conversation 4 of the Living Room Conversation series. I'm Pin Sangkel.
And I am Vincent Joseph.
Before we begin, we would like to ask if it is possible for everyone to turn on their camera if you could. We would love to see all your wonderful faces. We would also like to inform the audience that this conversation is being recorded and will be uploaded on our YouTube channel. Closed captions are available if you click on the CC button on the tab below your screen. We speak with you today from Syracuse, New York, which is the traditional territory of the Six Nation Haudenosaunee people. Syracuse University and its surrounding areas is still home to four federally recognized nations, the Oneida, Onondaga, Mohawk, and Seneca, and two unrecognized territories of the Cayuga and Tuscarora. Without them, we would not have access to this gathering and to this conversation. We take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land and to recognize their continued stewardship in this region.
We would also like to take this time to express our gratitude for our advisors. Professor Lori Brown has been a tremendous supporter and coach on multiple fronts. Professor Itaka Sho for her care, patient, and acute consideration in offering constructive criticism. Professor Britt Heversall has been an essential guide for our writers in the publication committee. And lastly, our keynote speaker, Jonathan Jackson, for his time and commitment for the success of this project. We would also like to thank the source, the School of Architecture, and Dean Michael Speaks, who will now say a few words before we begin.
Hi, Benson. Hi, Penn. Thank you for inviting me here tonight. I'm sorry I missed the other couple of events earlier in the week, but I'm thrilled to be here tonight to see Jonathan Jackson's lecture and to hear the conversation. This has been a kind of a project that's been going on for a while, and I'm glad to see it's all kind of coming to fruition. And I want to congratulate you both for your perseverance, for all the work you've done. You've done an enormous amount to advance, I think, a lot of important discussions that are happening at the school. So I want to thank you, and I look forward to the event tonight. So congratulations, and let's move it forward.
Thank you, Dean Speaks, for your words. We'll begin. Even before the political reckoning that surfaced during the pandemic, Not Again SU, a student-led movement at Syracuse University, demonstrated the marginalization of minority groups and student interests. Latent racism was brought to the forefront as the school administration had to face an ugly truth which many students and the administration had known for a long time. Then the pandemic entered our lives, social gap widened, simultaneously the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor served as a springboard that highlighted the detrimental preconception that are deeply rooted in the creation and implementation of our social structures. Even now, as we speak, hatred towards the AAPI community festers. How might conversation about identity, narrative, and influence provide a tool to empower underrepresented and misrepresented communities?
The Living Room Conversation is a platform for students to creatively explore this and other questions of race and justice through architecture and spatial design. It includes 3 ongoing projects: Erase from the Narrative, Through My Eyes, and Body and Space. Erase from the Narrative focuses on the plight of Black women, which has been consistently overlooked and overstepped throughout history. Through My Eyes questions how places, ephemeral or concrete, are tied to the formation of queer identities. Body and Space interrogates how clothing and garment affect the occupation and constitution of public space. Interlocutors from within and without the student body are responding to each of these efforts with written critiques and questions in order to introduce new perspectives, reinforce present theoretical positions, or otherwise drive each project beyond its initial thesis. This exchange presents an opportunity for the audience to refine and expand the conversation, to present judgments and ask difficult questions. They are working under the publication committee. Thank you everyone on the team for your effort for allowing these series of conversations to be possible. During May 2nd to May 5th, Erase from the Narrative, Through My Eyes, and Body and Space will be exhibited through projections on the facade of the Everson Museum of Art as part of the Urban Video Project. In addition, the publication committee will also launch the critique on publicationcommittee.com to complement the projected installations. This exhibition will then be the conclusion of the living room conversation.
Today is our fourth and final discussion of this series. The content for this evening will include a presentation by our keynote speaker, Jonathan Jackson.
Jonathan Jackson is our founding partner of We Should Do It All. Jonathan graduated from Kent State University with a degree in architecture. Prior to founding We Should Do It All in 2004, he worked for Studio Asia in Italy, Architectonics and Lindy Roy in New York City. He served 2 years on the AIGA New York Board of Directors and as visiting critic at Columbia University, Pratt, RISD, and École Supérieure en Visual Merchandising Design in Switzerland.
The presentation is centered around the overarching topic that has fostered the purpose for this series of conversations. Jonathan Jackson lecture will be followed by a brief presentation from Erased from the Narrative, Through My Eyes, and Body in Space, which are the projects that were discussed in our previous conversation throughout this week.
Now we would like to turn it over to Jonathan for his presentation.
Thank you guys for the introduction. I'm gonna share my screen. Just bear with me 1 second here. Well, I do want to say thank you, Penn and Benton, for the opportunity to come speak with you all here tonight for the Living Room Conversation Symposium. Thank you for bearing with me. It's been a rough day. 2 kids during COVID. I hope some of you all know what that's like. But I'll get started by introducing the team. I think anytime that we give a presentation, we try to just say that the thoughts and the work that comes out of the studio is through multiple voices and multiple authors. So I just wanted to express that really quickly. So the title of the talk, Share This or Shatter This, The American Crucible. The following is a series of run-on sentences. Excuse me. It's a series of run-on sentences that basically try to weave together this idea of space making, intrusion of space, safe space, and space beyond identity, all with the goal to combat white supremacy. So dwelling in the proper sense is now impossible. The traditional residences we grew up in have grown intolerable. Each trait of comfort in them is paid with the betrayal of knowledge. This is from Theodore Adorno, written in 1951. The shirt, Jim Crow Still Lurks, designed by Elijah Justice, really spoke to me in the sense of around last summer, during the George Floyd's death, we were all sort of shocked and dismayed by the acts of the police officer, the murder of George Floyd, and it got me thinking about this idea of knowledge and knowledge and sort of it being an interesting space, and this idea of being in the know as a place of space engagement. Sorry, I'm just trying to move some stuff over here. Forgive me once again. Jeez. So the idea of what do you know and what do I know? I do know that the idea of George Floyd's death opened the eyes and the ears of white America when the globe, or the globe at large, was in itself sickening to me, because it says, despite being told and shown in the constructed conditions of the Black struggle through every form of communication possible, verbal and nonverbal, written and listening, visual, was never enough to stop America's prosperity. America benefited from this pain. Only when COVID-19 halted your well-being did you have the opening in your schedule for a slow Black death. And yes, of course, I was angry about the loss of a Black human being, as I myself being one. One cannot escape the internal rage, hurt, and emotions that consume you, that being juxtaposed with the internal numbing that happens because sadly, this is our normal. The destruction of the Black body is an American pastime. In these recent days moving forward, please handle us with care. As we move into our guarded spaces of refuge and rebellion, as we all witness and recount this pastime's resurfacing with the violent treatment and murders of our Asian brothers and sisters and the loss of Dante Wright. So space making. The Black experience has emerged from the structure of slavery directly orchestrated by architecture and urban planning. Simply the racist architect and the racist urban planner. We often let architecture off the hook as if the profession isn't a reflection of society to which it takes place, as if there is little relationship between the people that maintain it and its singular views to the discipline, to who draws the lines in plan or in red line. It reminds me of a quote from Mos Def, where we talk about this idea of us separating ourselves from the field, where he talked about, people ask me what's going to go on with hip hop, like if it's some giant in the hillside. Well, we are hip hop. In this sense, we are architecture, and we are representative of its actions. So, we have made space in some of the most unexpected places because architecture's practitioners have controlled, blocked, and excluded us in too many facets I care to share. Some of the examples of the constructs are the slave ship, the slave quarters, slave house, the water fountain, how our cities are formed, the racist highways, an American dilemma, the Negro problem of the modern democracy. This was written in 1944 by Swedish economist Gunnar Myrdal. He was asked by the Carnegie Corporation to write about race relations in America in the 1930s and 40s. Gunnar put together a 1,500-page document, what you see here, book that was later used and sourced in the Brown versus Board of Education trial, and essentially he was hired as sort of an unbiased source to speak on race relations. And what he did, he gathered around 20 African-American scholars and researchers to go out into America and interview and research different components of race relations and its problem in the US. And essentially the book concluded that the Negro problem is a white man's problem. Myrdal formed a team that basically put essay after essay after essay to make up this volume. But little recognition from the team was acknowledged by him himself. He took their essays and moved their names to the back of the book, and it's the only place that they are written about. In 2019, commissioned by the Social Science Research Center, We Should Do It All, designed a website called An American Dilemma for the 21st Century. It basically is the answer to Gunnar Myrdal's erasure of his colleagues. So it highlights them and putting them in the forefront. It covers themes of race, population migration, economics, politics, inequality and justice, leadership and action, the Black community, gender and sexuality. Another project that we worked on, the Men of Change traveling show for the Smithsonian, this idea of redlining and space making. This is Monumental by Robert Pruitt. And we curated a show that had 25 artists depict 25 men of change that have changed American history, that changed the narrative around Black men in this country. Robert Pruitt's piece, Monumental, for me is a masterpiece in the sense of it takes a woman wearing antebellum garment and has the mapping of redlining on her head something that Ta-Nehisi Coates speaks of quite eloquently. Speak to that. We move to intrusion of space. Intrusion of space for me gets at this idea of not only intrusion of the physical space, but intrusion of the mental. This idea of white fear, fear of a Black planet. Here you see the cassette tape by Public Enemy, released in 1990. White fear also means that racism means that they don't get to have the luxuries of life anymore as well. Here you see the owner of a hotel pool going at protesters because both Black and white protesters jumped in the pool at a time when America across the country was draining their pools to fight having Black patrons at a pool. Here you see the hotel owner basically sprinkling or pouring cleanser fluid into the pool that would react with the chlorine, harming the skin of the people within the pool. This happened in 1964. This picture was taken in St. Augustine, Florida. Of course, we know this image, the Gordon Parks Untitled, this idea of always being within the white gaze, something that we all struggle with on a daily basis. Another art piece from the Men of Change show by Jelson Lee Innocent, lead paragraph. The men he was depicting was W.E.B. Du Bois, this idea of double consciousness. So the framing of two of the same piece mirroring each other is purposely diptych. This idea of not only being able to live oneself through its own eyes, through your own eyes, but always worrying about the white gaze and what that does to the Black psyche. So some of the actions that we're taking within our studio that I wanted to talk about briefly in efforts to stop white supremacy or at least do our part within it is this idea of transparency. Oftentimes we feel like, well, what we notice in the workforce is we are often not really interested in creating more entrepreneurs, but just continuing the workforce with regular workers. And my partner and I are taking it upon ourselves to open up our studio to expose our team to the business aspects of things. Oftentimes when we come out of school, we work for someone else and we might have side projects. We do not know which way to go when it comes to the finances of things. So we are opening up our studio from a financial point of view. Everyone will know what everyone is making. We one effort in stopping white supremacy and the idea of creating and sharing documents that are needed to make a business thrive is something that we're going to share to the world soon. But again, we're just tired of seeing the same old, and we think the world needs to shake up. Another thing that we are continuing to work on is this idea of giving money back. We are a Black-owned and woman-owned studio. We do okay, but we're not, rich by any means. But in order to fight white supremacy, we think, capitalism has a strong hand in that and in the recirculation of funds. So with any project that we get, a certain percentage goes to designers in need, charities, any movements that we see are viable or we are contributing to. We want to continue within this way of thinking and groom more of a cultivated workspace where everything can be shared in a way. My 5-year-old might be coming with me. Sorry. My struggle, before we move on, my struggle internally lies with the self-argument. We often are looking for spaces for acceptance. And in the same time, they never really fully embraced us through this history that we just zoomed through. And at the core of the 3 main projects erased from the narrative through my eyes, body and space, lies the need for recognition of existence, lies the permission the permeation and mutation of a standard space that is ill-equipped for transformation, ill-equipped for progression. I do wonder if we are to see a design world for what it truly is, how it functions, and how commissions are awarded, who's invited to the party, and should we be demanding to attend? Maybe it's time to seek something else, create something else, for something else, elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Your presentation was amazing. Now we would present each of the project Erase on the Narrative, Through My Eyes and Body and Space, starting with Erase on the Narrative by Ife.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so Erase from the Narrative is a series of conversations being held through different audiovisual mediums to show the reality of being a Black woman. The project seeks to join the discourse that promotes conversation and action in recognizing Black women's experiences and the unique nature it takes. The content explored through video and image medium addresses how narratives have been manipulated to overlook and marginalize, and even silence, Black women over time, through microaggressions, character assassinations, and exclusion. By erasing their experiences, Black women were being silenced and denied their rights to own their identity. Within feminism, we find that the Black woman's experience do not become non-Black women's experiences as a result of intersectionality. To explain this, we look to the idea of Black feminist thought, which proposes a new lens to the matrix of domination, a term formed by Patricia Hill Collins. This concept looks at the idea of oppression, not as an either-or dichotomous that renders one class of people privileged and the other oppressed, but rather challenges and pushes for the acceptance that modes of oppressions can interlock, meaning that one form of oppression does not represent the absence of another. Using the Black woman as a study model, the project aims to present a reality of which they experience discrimination, majorly through race and gender. The scope of study expands from two groups, with one's privilege being the absence of the other groups, and now addresses the idea that the oppressed can adopt the role of an oppressor as well. Black feminism is often either overlooked, erased, or co opted, with heightening numbers of Black women asserting themselves and excelling in politics, the arts, sciences, the media, and sports. We believe that it is important that you, our audience, hear and learn through voices of the Black women that you will encounter today. During the course of this project, we were able to interview 11 successful women within their respective fields with the aim of gaining their perspectives on the intersection of their race and gender. Each of the women we interviewed have shared how misogynoir has manifested into their lives professionally and socially, and how they have worked to overcome it to regain control of their narratives. We choose interviews as a medium of representation because in discussing the historical and current prejudices that the Black woman has faced, it became mandatory to hear the voices behind these stories, bringing a level of ethos to the conversation and allowing the audience the chance to understand on an empathetic level what it means to walk in a Black woman's shoes. The conversation became wider than the field of architecture, but took on a broader scope to engage women in all fields. We have two of these women here today, Ms. Josephia Ross and Ms. Felicia Ross. We chose these two women today because of their independence within their separate professions, their willingness to step out of the box that Black women are often put in, and forge a path for themselves that others coming after can look up to. In this path, they found success, something that we are looking to celebrate more of. Although we do believe it is important to highlight the issues that Black women face, we also find it key to celebrate them and their successes. With that being said, I'm going to play part of the video from the interviews.
My name is Janice Comer, and I am from White Plains, New York.
I'm Ivania, and I'm from New Jersey.
My name is Shelda Joseph. I'm from Haiti.
Foma Ebo. I'm from Brooklyn, New York.
My name is Ehid. I was born in Lagos, Nigeria.
Josephia Rouse. I am originally from South Carolina.
Teresa Austin, and I'm from Kingston, Jamaica.
Victorian Love, and I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Kanali Sandrine Bamba. I was born in the capital of Guinea, which is located in West Africa.
Chukwu Akporo, and I'm from Lagos, Nigeria.
My name is Felicia Ross. I'm a singer, songwriter, producer, pianist, philanthropist, and entrepreneur from South Florida.
I'm a fourth year at Syracuse University.
I'm a third-year student in the Students Architecture program.
I work in residential architecture.
I basically do art, architecture, and interior design.
I am a photographer.
I'm a multidisciplinary artist, and my work focuses around Black hair, Black culture, decolonization.
I am a family law attorney.
I'm a nurse.
I'm a trained architect and urban planner. I consider myself an urban designer.
My name is Dr. Moya Bailey. I am an assistant professor at Northeastern University in Boston. I am in the Africana Studies program and the Women's Gender and Sexualities program.
Have you ever felt overlooked or marginalized as a Black woman in your field? Feel free to share an experience.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. I don't know if there's a time when I didn't experience all of those things. Microaggressions, gaslighting, tone policing.
Black people as a whole are so underrepresented in the field of architecture. You're already starting at a level of tokenism.
I usually get patients who refuse my services.
Comments from male white attorneys about how much money did I make? Oh, you made more money than me.
When it comes to my work specifically, like especially when it was about my identity, I felt really just ignored.
I was afraid for my life. I had so much anxiety. I remember one day I was eating lunch and one of the directors called me over and I said, "Can you give me a moment, please? I'm eating." I think later in that week, the other Black person was head of risk management for human resources. And he said, "Oh yeah, the director said you gave him attitude and, he asked you for help and you looked at him and said, 'I'm not helping you. I'm eating my lunch.'" And I was like, wow, I don't even talk like that. I was blown away.
Thank you, Ife, for your presentation. Now, Bryce will offer a brief presentation for Through My Eyes.
So to give some context, I'm going to unabashedly reuse my slides from Tuesday because I know not everybody was there. So it was a pretty difficult topic for us to grapple with because the word queer itself hardly has a consistent meaning. A taxonomy of the word would expose changes from decade to decade, person to person, even discipline to discipline. We confronted this multivalence directly when, to orientate ourselves, we surveyed canonical literature from architecture, or at least canonical as you can get with the word queer in architecture. We were left referring to curator designers who worked in the 1990s, and their thinking just ended up feeling a generation away from a bunch of 20-somethings for whom queer had already taken on a pretty different meaning. Aaron Betsky, for example, was more interested in concrete aesthetics, analogies to camp and the closet. Joel Sanders, by contrast, probed the construction of sexual identity through objects, and this felt a lot closer to our current understanding of queerness, but still not quite right, because identity became a means to understanding sexuality or romance. It seemed to us the tangible space was situated amongst arguably more influential counterparts, such as online chat rooms, anxious Google searches, dating apps. How are we supposed to think about queer space in this expanded field? In general, an interview series is actually what provided the answer for us. So I'll play a short clip.
I think, yeah, there are places. I just don't think that they're concrete places.
I don't know. Cisgender, bisexual woman.
I identify as a gay male.
For the past few years, I've been using she, her pronouns.
Realizing that I think I do identify more with non-binary.
But I'm interested in starting to use she, they pronouns.
Again, that's easy question. That's my answer.
Even like the idea of like transness from like what like I understand it as is kind of limited itself.
The multitude of meanings that brings up.
It started to bring up the question of my gender, which has now become more nebulous, which has been interesting.
So I'm trying to like break that understanding or just like be okay with I don't know what I am right now. That's okay.
Like I think having queer friends, and I think that spaces that I've created with them in terms of our relationships.
Yeah, moving, whatever, reconnecting with people who are also still figuring themselves out and whatnot.
A lot of it has to do with like the people that are there and
really being able to prioritize those conversations has made me
what they're comfortable experiencing or what they're comfortable
much more responsive
expressing about themselves.
What my identity begs to know about itself.
It's interesting because we're in obviously a quarantine and
during a time where you're not really allowed to congregate or like
space is so limited in terms of like spaces you can occupy and like spaces that make sense.
Be in a group of large people or in necessarily in like enclosed spaces. It has been hard.
In quarantine, you can't do a lot, meet up with people or talk to people.
I kind of wish that at this point in my life now where I am kind of exploring gender and trying to figure these things out.
So I feel like I had to physically go to certain spaces where I was forced to sit down and think and feel.
In my head, that's one space.
I wish that I could kind of like go out and experience groups of maybe trans inclusive spaces or non-binary inclusive spaces that I don't really know what that would look like at this point. And so I think places that like either allow for more openness and diversity or don't allude to those ideas, I think those are very beneficial.
And it was weird. So it felt really regressive and really like I couldn't find myself and I couldn't find what makes me happy and what, you know, a positive internal headspace. I was just like, oh, how can we design for intersectional queer space? I'm like, well, you can't even like, I was like, have you even existed in an intersectional queer space, Patrick? Or like, you haven't existed in enough spaces to like make that like question or like hypothesize about that. Like, it's just stupid.
So in general, that kind of helped us get a better sense for what felt unsatisfactory about some of the earlier research that we'd been conducting. And it's mostly just that if you were present on Tuesday, you might have heard Patrick's sentiment taken a step further by ourselves and Jay for Kolb, that queer space can't really be made and that trying to conceive of it without people is something that's ultimately counterproductive. Rather, our conversation highlighted a pretty different understanding of queerness or queering informed by transgender studies that seems a lot more relevant to people our age right now. The field's pertinence was highlighted by a pretty recent issue of Footprint. And I think I generally agree with the argument that transgender studies moves our conversations beyond sexual relationships to identity and from identity onto a number of interwoven topics, whether that's the disorientation of a pandemic and its force to make you re-examine yourself, or just a more holistic understanding of inclusivity. So we'll be really excited to hear what one of its foremost scholars can add to the conversation tonight.
Thank you, Bryce, for your presentation. And now I'm going to present Body in Space.
You can come forward, Cameron.
The conversation is between body and space. Our project uses the pre-existing relationships between body, garment, and space to propose new science or analyze existing ones. The garments designed and created act as the visual representation where the craft, cuts, and mending are utilized as means to illustrate and explore a relationship between the body and the space. Body and Space includes 3 projects. Crafting Domestic Comfort, Women on the Street by Lenny Mara and Andrea Herrera, Plastic Crown by Benson Joseph and myself, and Half Ex Angela by Christabel Chung and Luis Lopez. Each project begins with a piece of garment, which are the harness, the crown, and the hoodie, and each project is explored through a series of drawings and fabrication processes. Lenny's and Andrea's project, Crafting Domestic Comfort, Women on the Street, is a conversation working to define domestic comfort as an assertion of feminine strength through collective making. The crisis in question is the incredibly particular spatial and temporal phenomenon of a woman walking home at night, a situation taking place at the cusp of domestic comfort and the harsh urban void in both location and time. Domestic comfort being a constructed sense of familiarity within one's community and home, where the thought of our safety is far from occupying our consciousness. Its plasticity is embraced in a garment using domestic textiles, mending the fear and vulnerability felt by women when walking alone at night. A quilted textile is used in the recollection of our core identities and tailored to harness the collective spirit for protection. We believe the power of collective mending within sewn textile can mediate between the woman's body and urbanity and embrace a collective femininity for individual empowerment. Instead of losing herself in the urban void, she finds confidence in her feminine identity and motivation to return home to those who love her, feeling the extension of domestic comfort, the textiles being its vessel. Our project is titled Plastic Crown. The Thai king adorns 17-pound golden crown. By recreating crowns with light single-use plastic bottles, the project questions the stability of the monarchy and ridicules its power. While the weight of the crown symbolizes the responsibility and the burden carried by the monarchy, the Thai people are the actual ones bearing the weight of the oppressing government. The intended users of the new crowns are the young students protesting the monarchy on the streets of Bangkok as we speak. The plastic crown will not protect the students physically when they criticize the government, but with its power to obscure the protesters' faces, the crowns can protect their identity while amplifying the critical opinions. The discarded single-use plastic bottles can be found easily, and the crowns take little and use no glue to construct. As plastic crowns are reused over and over, they become memorable sculptural pieces that hold meanings to participants and observers. Christabel's and Louis' project, Half Ex Angela, deals with the repetitive and demanding nature of domestic work that leads to the slow destruction seen in clothing. One such domestic worker is the mother of Christabel Chung, one of the designers of this project. The minute Christabel's mother wakes up around 5:30 a.m. until she goes to sleep around 11 p.m., she works. There is no time to clock off like Christabel's father with his 9-to-5 job. The mother wears her son's old hoodie, and there are 23 holes and several stains. She has sent photographs of the hoodie to the design team, in which the team has measured Christabel to scale the hoodie to the right size, to create the sewing patterns, and to analyze the stains and holes. These sewing patterns are then cut onto a similar fabric. The team documented the force it took to recreate the holes and stains by slashing the hoodie with a knife and staining it with tea. The collected evidence reveals the actions, energy, and time needed to damage the original garment. It may be damaged, but its life continues because it is unafraid of destruction. Thank you. Now, Professor Laurie Brown, who is your moderator for this evening, will conclude our week-long symposium with a panel discussion followed by a Q&A session. Professor Brown, who is one of our advisors, is a Syracuse University School of Architecture professor, a licensed architect in the state of New York, a co-founder of Architects, a group dedicated to transforming the architecture profession for women as well. Her work emerges from the belief that architecture can participate in and impact people's everyday life. She's one of this year's Architectural League's emerging voices as well. Professor Brown will now introduce the panelists for the conversation.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here and to be among so many inspiring people. So the first person I'd like to introduce is Professor Yutaka Sho, who's an assistant professor of architecture here at Syracuse University and a partner in General Architecture Collaborative, a nonprofit design firm. Her research focuses on roles of architecture in the global development industry and post-conflict reconciliation. In Rwanda, GAC is constructing self-built homes while training the end users in construction skills. In 2014, GAC's Mazawara Village project received the EDRA Great Places Award, and they've completed 7 new buildings, as well as the Masora Health Clinic, which has received 5 national and international awards in 2015. Professor Britt Eversole is an assistant professor of architecture at Syracuse University, where he teaches courses in architectural design, research, and the history of architectural theory. His research focuses on intersections of design, technology, and politics in the 20th century, with an emphasis on issues of pre-war and post-war democracy. He has most recently published on RAND Corporation to weaponize open source urban and architectural models and platforms. Jaffer Cole, along with Evie Demantopoulou, I hope I pronounced that correctly, have founded NA, an award-winning New York-based design practice. Prior to that, Jaffer worked as a designer in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles for a range of international studios. He's currently an adjunct assistant professor at Columbia University's GSAP and was the 2015 Muschenheim Fellow at the University of Michigan's Taubman College. Previously, he worked on the 13th Venice Architectural Biennial under David Chipperfield, and before that was the U.S. editor for the Architectural Review. Ms. Josephia Rouse is a self-employed family law attorney. Her office mission focuses on bringing families closer to their old lives and building strong paths toward their new ones. Her practice also aims to educate families on Maryland law, common outcomes in Maryland courts, and ways to resolve issues that frequently come up when families are readjusting their entire lives. Felicia Ross prides herself on putting education and business at the forefront of her career. She's a 100% independent recording artist who runs and operates her own music production company. Felicia Ross Music. Thank you. She has also a degree in biology obtained while touring and performing from the University of Miami. She has passionately developed her craft of singing and playing the piano. Her unwavering dedication has allowed her to develop her vocal, instrumental, songwriting, and production skills to master and incorporate several styles of genres in her music, ranging from classical, R&B, jazz, soul, and world music in several languages, including English, French, and Creole. Susan Stryker is a founding figure and leading trans activist in the field of transgender studies. She currently holds the Barbara Lee Professorship in Women's Leadership at Mills College and is on leave from the University of Arizona, where she leads the Transgender Studies Initiative and serves as founding co-editor of the journal TSQ, Transgender Studies Quarterly. An Emmy-winning documentary filmmaker, Screaming Queens, The Riot at Compton's Cafeteria. She has also been recognized for her co-edited anthologies, The Transgender Studies Reader and The Transgender Studies Reader 2. Stryker has also collaborated with architect Joel Sanders and legal scholar Terry Kogan to research inclusive design installed. So I'm honored to be moderating the discussion with all of you. And the students have asked me to read a part of their methods. But before I do that, I just want to just say a few things briefly. And I think in response to the talk by Jonathan, and something he said really resonated with me about somehow architecture gets let off the hook. And I think and I want to say no, I refuse to let architecture off the hook when it has been and continues to be complicit in spatial apartheid of our American landscape. When we think about redlining practices that remain and continue to disenfranchise thousands of people within our country. And I also think that the work that these students have done, thinking about them now collectively over the course of this week, has really helped me think about the way that their work in response to that prompt by Jonathan is both a critique and a challenge and a way to create openings of agency that really push back on the structures of white supremacist, cis male, patriarchal, colonial settler capitalist world that we are all engaged with. And I see that these students' works have found openings and abilities to create some really important space for engagement and what I hope will be conversation tonight. The methods the students have created are some of the following. So they write about the premise of the conversation is centered on the necessity to convey and understand perspectives. They aim to offer a method within which to construct a rhetorical argument across different mediums. Through varying perspectives, one can present a body of work that aims to represent and thoroughly review the selected themes which have been propelled throughout these 3 projects. The selected mediums are included are text, interviews, visual representations, as well as fabrication and filmmaking. The overall project is attempting to foster conversations that portray the interrelations of the final product an audience sees by setting up a dialogue between investigators and interlocutors. By this framework, they begin to understand the power and importance that these forms of representation have in delivering information. They aim to expand the notion of conversation through discourse as it is understood within today's society. It is no longer confined to the limited group of those who share similar opinions on the subject. Through questioning, it brings forth differing perspectives, allowing for productive conversations and removing the discomfort that prohibits people from disagreeing with one's work. So these series of investigations are done by separate groups to understand power through forms of representation. So one of the questions they would like for all of you to discuss is how do these investigations start to show possible interconnections of identity, power, and its representation? And how are they similar and or different in the way that they've been presented this evening? So I'd like to open it up to our panel for conversation.
I'd love to start if I may.
Pardon?
I say I'd love to start if I may.
Oh, sure. Sorry.
No. I just am so taken back by hearing, the discourse that's going on in a world outside of my own, and the happiness that I feel in knowing that it's happening, which kind of leads into your question, which is why I wanted to chime in. For all of you, for all of those that don't know me, my name is Felicia Ross. I'm a singer, songwriter, producer, entrepreneur. I'm in a whole entirely different world, but similar to you all, I'm an artist as well in my own right. And I feel like the main answer to your question is that before, at least when I was in college, none of this was ever discussed as an intellectual conversation amongst peers in school, educators, students, panel. This was more like a conversation one would have with their own personal peers. And I think that that's the beginning of the end of the problem and the beginning of the solution. And it's just inspiring to know that this is a curriculum that people can digest, that you can really reach towards people who have real information to share and real insight to share, and can do that in a peer setting, but in a formal educational setting too. And I think that that's the difference in the way that we can obstruct this big giant is by starting to bite off where you can chew, and that's having conversation. That's having conversation amongst people that can really give you an insight to why this this narrative is so important, and why we do need to be hearing from people who are marginalized and whose voices have been muted for so long. I just find it to be so inspirational that even that you have brought me here to talk about it from my scope, and that I could hear it from your guys's, and that's how we can break down these walls to a better tomorrow, I think.
I guess I can jump in for a second. I mean, I really love that response, Lucia, from you. I think the idea, and I'm an architect and coming out of the world of architecture, some of the way to kind of, I don't know, produce or mine the possibilities of this type of practice that you're describing, I think, Lori, is through, in my mind, just relationships, right? And one of the things that I talked a lot about during the panel on Tuesday, which maybe some of you were there for and many weren't, was this idea that for me, queer space is not necessarily the subject of my interest as much as how queer relationships can lead to new forms of space making. And so how we can sort of work within a collaborative mesh or network to produce kind of like new programs, new sites, new clients, basically to invent sort of new possibilities for architecture based purely on social network relationship. I mean, and I don't mean that in the kind of like new media sense, but the kind of anthropological, like the kind of beauty of relationships can have a radical political possibility. And I think that kind of having those conversations, as Felicia you described, is paramount. And it's kind of the tool that we all have, and it's transdisciplinary, right? It can like work across disciplines, and it allows us to kind of make work that's otherwise impossible. And that's how we try and practice as best we can in my studio, and how I always try and work with especially younger people who don't feel so firmly fixed in the idea that certain relationships are possible or likely or necessary or sanctioned or inherited, but to kind of invent new forms of communication. So for me, that would be how I would answer.
Well, I'll go ahead and jump in. One of the things that I was thinking about, you know, first of all, it's like all the presentations I felt really engaged with. Thank you for that. But I was thinking about, since this was a panel on method, I was just sort of in the back of my head, I kept thinking about, well, like what's one of the methods that I use for like learning and thinking and making work, and really thinking for me from a trans perspective of thinking about embodiment as method. You know, that you know, it's a familiar idea, I think, from like women of color feminism. I think particularly about like Shari Moraga and Bridge Called My Back, the idea of like theory in the flesh, you know, that there's something that you know from like how you move in your particular ways with your particular way of embodiment or mode of embodiment through the world. And that knowledge comes from that, from what you learn from being like accommodated or not accommodated, you know, like what parts of the world feel like sandpaper when you move against them? What parts feel like a gun in your face? You know, like which parts feel easy and slippery and fun? And that, you know, that we often think about, like when we're thinking about architecture or urban design, or even, you know, like residential architecture as like spaces that are about facilitating relationships between people, or that you think about, yeah, you know, like if you're trying to design space to be facilitative somehow of a new kind of sociality, you think about the design of the space, but you don't think about the embodiment of the people in it as something that is equally designed. Even when you're thinking relationally, you're not thinking about body as something that moves. You tend to think about body as more fixed, you know, and that when we think about, say, like feminist politics, it's usually imagined as in relationship to a biologically female reproductive capacity that doesn't change, you know. Or if you think about race, it's kind of like, well, there's some attribute of body that, you know, perhaps is not changeable, and the conversation about race and racism is about saying like, well, that difference doesn't mean this thing that like a white supremacist society wants to put on me. But there's still like this imagining of like the body as something that in and of itself doesn't change or isn't a designed space, you know. I think we think more along those lines, and we think about disability, like often like disability is something that just happens to you. It is about a change in your mode of embodiment. You tend to think, I think people think about disability in a way that has more, it's not as naturalized as questions about sex and race. Design questions come up more readily. It's like, you know, we think about universal design or accessible design in ways that you don't think about anti-racist design or anti-feminist design. And for me, like trans just kind of fits into that conversation. And when I say like, no, it's like our bodies are as transformable as everything else that is in the environment. It is not the uninterrogated, naturalized space that, or, you know, location that space is designed around. So, you know, I think if we pay attention to questions of the transformability of the body and of what we learn, you know, and in which registers, you know, bodies can be transformed and which not, which ways they can't be, that, yeah, it's like we think about embodiment as method, as of theories in the flesh, and the idea is that embodiment is also a transformable thing that can be put in relationship to questions of social justice. I think it opens up all kinds of interesting opportunities for thinking about design, dwelling in a built space of embodiment, not just in a structure external to the body. I'll stop now.
I want to jump in. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Professor. Hi, everyone. My name is Josephia Rouse. I think when the one thing that really comes up when I think about the different presentations and the similarities within all of the presentations is that the experts are the individuals that are going through that thing. And they're the ones that can explain what it is. And I think the other similarity that just really points out to me is how ignorant we all can be when you attempt to describe to someone or judge someone else's experience, and how much we should just not do that, right? I would not be able to fully understand, for instance, Professor Stryker's explanation, but I do understand. No, I'm being very serious because that is your experience, right? I can have a further discussion with you to empathize or to understand and to understand how I can walk with you as you experience your life and I experience mine. And I think that's one of the things that this presentation does as well. I think it's a teaching moment to tell us that when someone is presenting or someone is expressing, I think about Mr. Jackson, he was expressing how he is experiencing his art and how he is attempting to kind of communicate that to the world, is that if you are interested in someone and someone sparks interest in your heart, the best thing we can always do is to have an open conversation about what that experience is before judging it, before giving our opinions, and before trying to come up with solutions for an experience you really cannot understand. So you can never skip that first step. I think, you know, we were talking about, and I've started to have a conversation with some peers about what Asian Americans are going through. We had a conversation about that Monday as well. But again, it just relates to, I don't understand until we have an in-depth conversation about those experiences. And the one thing that really pulls up to me, or I think about, because when I'm offended, you know, as a Black person, the first thing that comes to my mind, you are assuming something about me. You know, I think that's what a lot, you know, everyone can assume, that you are assuming that you understand something that you can't. And you're not guilty for not understanding or not knowing. But our act or our humanity is, before you judge or communicate with someone or interact with them and give them your opinion, you should take the time to understand what's going on.
You talker?
Yeah. Everything that I've just heard resonates very much with me, and especially the embodiment of as a method, working method, and architecture as a new kind of sociality. And I was really excited to work with the group who chose me as an advisor, the Body and Space. And for them, it's the material as a method, material as an embodiment, and not even the building itself, but working with the material and manipulated materials, they are creating this evidence of sociality and interaction, especially because they make it together. And that made me, and also Jonathan's talk made me reflect on reconciliation, how we could use that collectively making process as a method of reconciliation. And I had a chance to work with former genocidaires and survivors in Rwanda, and this group makes houses together for each other. And through the space and the time that they share on the construction site, they finally start to talk. And it took them, months to be even in the same room because of the trauma. And of course, they still one side cannot fully forgive the former perpetrators, but they're at least talking. But then without the materiality and manipulation of basically dirt into blocks and making it into a space where one of the survivors will live, without that kind of tangible process, I don't think reconciliation is possible. And it's still really difficult. So that makes me think that architectural education needs to involve the making process, the actual design, but also maintenance afterwards, the whole thing, the whole architectural process as a commons where we take care of things, materials and the environment and the people in it, and own it and make decisions together and govern it together. So I think architecture has that potential for me more than anything else, but that's me biased.
So first of all, thank you for asking me to participate, and congratulations to all of you on the incredible accomplishments that you've achieved with these installations and interventions. I think they're rather extraordinary, and I really appreciate the space that you've created for your colleagues as a result of these interventions, which I think is in and of itself an extraordinary thing. When I first saw that the topic tonight was method, I thought to myself that was such an architect topic. But I think that you mean method in a different way. I think that method almost needs to be represented with a little M on your poster and on your advertising, because it's not that sort of method that brings about a determinate end. It's precisely the opposite. So and Jaffer may recognize this quote. There's an art historian, Hal Foster, who likes to say that method is how you find allies. Method is how you find people to have conversations with. Method is how you put your work in relation to other people that you want to enter into a dialogue. Sometimes a critical dialogue, sometimes a dialogue where you disagree with them. And I think that, he means that discursively, but I think if you start to think about that method as an activist act, method becomes, for the activist, it's a gift. And I think for me that's what these projects are doing. They're offering method not as something to be copied or to be studied or to be analyzed, but to be shared and to be riffed on and to be adapted and to be reinvented and to be hacked and even to be abused, not as some kind of deference or homage, but out of solidarity, which I think is a kind of an extraordinary, generous thing that you've all done here. And so to reframe this as maybe method with a little M, it's an invitation not to over-intellectualize, but instead to enjoy the pleasure of being in a kind of relationship with other people. And I mean relation not with a capital R, the way that Bourriel would use it in terms of relational aesthetics, but the way that Edouard Glissant, who's a Caribbean scholar, means it, where for him, it's about a kind of fusion of the local and the global. It's an opening up. It's a sharing of oneself and a sharing and a listening at the same time. And so it's a means of that brings one together, brings multiple people together in a project that is generated by and rooted in a kind of a pleasure of doing, a pleasure of making, sharing, listening, circulating, and traveling, putting oneself in a position of fragility, but being fragile with other people at the same time. So I'm going to shut up and stop giving a lecture, but I think that it's a really fantastic collection of interventions that invite dialogue rather than trying to make a singular pronouncement. They're not closing down the conversation, they're opening it up.
You know, one thing I really appreciate, in response to all of your comments, is thinking about how this is located within a school of architecture, and what is that doing within the process, and even the small n methods of the educational structure. So I was just on a co-chaired a panel, literally like finished at 6:10 at SAH, the Society of Architectural Historians, that's looking at alliance activism in architecture since 1968, and thinking about how, what is this body of knowledge we call architecture, and how what these students are doing within their methodologies is intervening in, expanding, and critiquing the kind of structure of the discipline. And so I'm curious how you all think about their work relative to its location, its disciplinary, I would say transdisciplinary location, because all of them are moving in and between several disciplines simultaneously. And I know some of you are not in architecture, but architecture adjacent, design adjacent. So how do you see this body of work that the students have been pursuing in relationship to the kind of disciplinary specificity, and or what that does for the future of that body of knowledge?
I'll go again, since I'm seemingly one of the few non-architecture based individuals, but I think in this conversation and hearing, as Josephina had mentioned, it's like you hear the plight of other people and it resonates with you because the plights are very similar. The story, although the factors might change, the themes are the same. And I think that relatability and that community does push forward the solutions to these problems, because no matter what your discipline is, mine is music and entertainment, although it's not architecture, although the trade is different, the mindset must be the same, the challenges are the same, the affronts to one's dreams are often the same. And I think when people get to replay the same theme but in a different perspective, it helps them digest why the theme is so destructive in what we're combating. I think that hearing other people's perspective gives just an easier way for people to digest, okay, well, how do we get towards a solution? Because although I've been listening to you guys from an architectural perspective, I don't feel like I'm outside of the conversation so much that I can relate to anything that anybody's saying, or that I feel like even what I'm saying is undigestible to you all. So I think that the beginning of the answers are, again, just in listening and hearing how similar we all are in what we're trying to combat, and that the issues that we're all facing, that we're speaking of, are a global issue, and that they reign in many, in all of our lives, and that our perspectives are all so different, but so the same, and that we need to focus on our sameness and our unity, and have some unity and a unifying space to try to chip away at how this can end, for the future generations. Again, even doing this in an educational platform, for me, as someone who graduated school, a decade ago, just gives me hope, because when I was in school, this type of discussion was, again, it was spoken of amongst peers, but it wasn't in a intellectual, although we were speaking intellectually, it wasn't an intellectual educational perspective. And I think just the strides that will continue to be made will be, you know, how one day that we will surpass all of these issues of non-inclusion as being a problem. And I can't wait for that day.
So, little known fact, Benson is my little brother. Haha, I get to do that. And so I haven't been, you don't have to hide, sir. You don't have to hide. But I've been kind of on this architectural journey with him for like the last 5 years. And it was interesting to me when, you know, he was still in Florida, and he was explaining to me the thing about architecture, and I think someone brought it up just now, is that people make decisions about where you live and how you're going to walk up into a space, or how you're going to view things when you walk into a building, or how you're going to make the right when you're, you know, on a road in a city, or when are you going to see the sunset? At what point are you going to see the sun over which building? Like, people made all of these decisions. And I think it's funny because someone brought up in one of the presentations about redlining, I think that was Mr. Jackson, that someone makes the decisions just about everything you see. And someone made the decisions, even in architecture, about, well, how are we going to hide the racism, right? And so I can only talk about this part of things. We're going to hide it, but with a beautiful highway, right? That's what we're going to sell. We're going to hide it with these awesome, you know, high-rise buildings for low-income people. We're going to hide it by providing, you know, we're going to do suburbia, and we're going to plan these things, but they're far away enough that you have to be in a car and you have to drive 20 miles, you know, in order to get to that place. And low-income people cannot do that, right? And that's going to fix that issue. And it's amazing to me because I connected what he had told me again in the beginning of his journey, that a lot of people made these decisions, and you now wonder the decision that was given. So it makes me think that it is almost a mandate to be in truth as to when you have the power to make decisions about how we move in the world, right? Your architectures make decisions about how we see, you know, how we see the sun, how we see a city, when we go into a city, what's the first thing we see, right? Because I believe Benson was explaining to me, like, the skyline is not, it's not for architecture, that's not a play thing. You know, the way you come in on the highway, you see a city for the first time, that's planned out. He was listening in class to somebody. But anyway, because of that, it really makes me think that there should be a mandate to really seriously take into consideration not just the beauty of something, or if you're given a project that somebody wants you to have one main focus, but, you know, I'm in a profession, I'm a lawyer, we have ethical considerations. What are the ethical considerations for everyone in your society when you're making a decision as an architecture to ensure that you're doing it for the goodness of the entire society? So I can only come from the perspective of what I've learned from redlining recently, and those things that I just described. But I think it's interesting to hear that, right? And to hear what that mandate is for architecture that we heard tonight.
Benson, you're busted. That's awesome. So you guys have proven that you don't really need a syllabus from us to run the studio, right? Like, you kind of organize yourself, came up with the issues and wrote a program and scheduled it and came up with the deliverables. And that made me realize that we treat curriculum or the content of the curriculum as if we treat democracy for developing countries. Like, we always say, well, you guys are not ready for democracy. First, you have to get rich, you have to have the infrastructure, and then you can make your own decisions, as if that's a luxury and you have to earn it. It's not a human right. So if that's the case, if students have to wait till the 4th year to talk about this issue outside of studio, which is tons of work, you guys have done so much work, but like, why is this not studio? You know, since Dean Speaks is here, I think we should reconsider how we understand core, how we understand what is at the core of architectural education, and not wait till the students mature and they're, you know, somehow ready to be free or ready to understand democracy. It needs to be the core of it, it seems.
Yutaka, I'd like to maybe make a response to that and say, first, it's not to me that you need to make this pitch. You need to make this to the curriculum committee. You know that better than I do. I don't control the curriculum. But let me, I do want to say some things related to that, because Benson and Penn have not waited till the 4th year or the 5th year to do this. They've been doing this, if you've been watching, they've been doing this for some time. I know for at least 3 years. And I say that because, and I was thinking a lot about method, and method not of each of the, let's say, content areas for each of the discussions, but more, and not even method of architecture, and not method of space making, and not even method of design, but method of creating and delivering a kind of educational structure that may be antithetical to what you're describing, Yutaka, as the curriculum. I agree with that. What is interesting about that for me, because I've been working with them closely for a while on a lot of different projects. We started talking about body and space almost 3 years ago, I think, Benson, maybe. Been a while ago. But you know, one of the things that happened, and it happened even tonight, and I learned a lot from them in the way that they've organized this. So this project is I think it's a larger comprehensive project. You all have seen a couple of iterations of it and a couple of versions of it, but actually it's a very sophisticated project, but that takes a lot of different turns. And when I say I learned something about it, so very often I will have a great conversation with Penn and Benson about a particular project. We'll come to some kind of conclusion about something, and then later, like yesterday, Penn emailed me and said, "Can you join tomorrow night?" And if any of you were on the beginning of the call tonight, you would have seen this. I said, "Sure, cool. What do you want me to do?" And because I like many of you, I do tons of, you know, we're doing a lot of events. We have a lot of student events, a lot of admitted student events, and a lot of things. And when I came on tonight, very typically, I had no idea what they wanted me to do. But of course, because I love working with them, I'll try to do whatever it is. But they completely sort of threw me, because they didn't tell me what we were doing. I didn't really even know what the format was tonight. As always, it's very structured. It's also very open. It's very improvisational, but it's also very rigorous. And the thing that I have liked most about working with them, and you know, I think one of the larger organizing kind of rubrics of this is the living room conversation. This was a category of conversation that was developed. I see DJ Butler's here tonight, with a project that we did to celebrate the work of Kermit Lee, maybe at least a year ago, who is one of our most illustrious Black alum and professors. And they came up with this great concept, and it just has kept expanding. But even with that project, you know, we would kind of work together. I learned a lot from them. I think we produced some pretty amazing things with a lot of the people who are part of this project tonight. All I want to just, maybe I'll just stop. But what I do want to say is that there is a method here. I agree with, I don't know if it was Britt who said there's a small M here. Yeah, I think it's a small M because it's very improvisational, but it's very rigorous. And it does present a kind of alternative to the professional curriculum that we all work with, but that we all notice to be challenged in many ways. And while I think a lot of us are very interested in challenging the content of the curriculum, we don't think a lot about the form of the curriculum. That is to say, the form that the curriculum takes. There's very old-fashioned discussions and debates in modernism about form and content, and that those go on and on all day. Jonathan Jackson cited Theodore Adorno tonight. That's at the center of his work and a lot of his sort of theorization. But the form, I think, of these conversations and the form of the living room conversation and each of these, I think, is an inspiring form that we can all learn something from. And honestly, I think a lot of times Penn and Benson and the larger group know exactly what they're doing, and a lot of times they don't. And it's in the kind of interplay between the structuring of that and the letting it kind of play freely that really exciting things happen. And I just want to say I appreciate, I have appreciated working with them and appreciate conversations tonight, and we'll be quiet and listen and learn more. But I do applaud what they've done. Yeah.
I want to I put it in the chat, but please, if you have questions, we would love to hear from the audience more broadly to our panelists. So please feel free to ask a question or provide a comment or discussion.
I was going to maybe add one sort of note
Please.
about the curriculum and the idea of pedagogy and teaching and studying. Tying it back to Jonathan, who I guess isn't with us now, but one of the things I found really beautiful and kind of funny about his presentation was the transition from showing this beautiful rug that he's doing for Design Within Reach and talking about the kind of codification of language and this idea of like creating this embedded message in the rug. And then the next slide was him saying, and the work within our studio is all about transparency. And what I loved about that was like taking a thing that was like a secret message and that was meant to be almost like a Trojan horse, entering this really stunning quote into the homes of all these like rich white people in his language that kind of carried this incredibly subversive message within it, and then talking about the kind of role of transparency. And I actually thought that was like a really stunning kind of, not a paradox, and it wasn't a contradiction either. It was the simultaneity of what we do that's clear and what we do that's obtuse. And I think, Britt, you brought up glissant, and actually at our panel discussion on Tuesday, Bryce, who I think is still on the call, gave us this amazing line, which Bryce, you should jump in because I'm going to botch it, but the very well-known glissant line about the longing for the right to obscurity, I think it is, something around here. And I think to even thinking about Dean Speaks, your kind of description of like the curriculum and all these things, and I guess Penn and Benson working kind of in the shadows, but also in the light for the last few years, making these things happen. The work that we do that's codified in Jonathan's language, that's maybe secret, that exists in the kind of world of obscurity, versus what we do that's kind of like public and open and transparent. I think that the kind of combination of those two things together, and this is very important to how we practice architecture. Architecture is a service profession. We work with clients. We aren't artists necessarily. We don't get to just make whatever we want. We have capitalism as our, our leader in a way that can be very problematic and terrible, but also that's how we work and produce buildings. So what can we do within those structures of power that is subversive? What are we doing, outside of the eye of capitalism and power? And what are we doing in service of it? When can we make things transparent and clear? And when do we kind of like build radical kind of ideology outside of those systems. I don't have an answer, but it's my one kind of claim for, I don't know, it's my one hope that the students who are on this call, who have followed this 3-day amazing marathon of talks, can maybe take away from, which is that within all of these, it seems from the presentations today, latent in those conversations are these issues around how we operate vis-a-vis power structures. And I think that Jonathan's model presented in his lecture was a really beautiful reminder that it's both about transparency and obscurity at the same time. And I think that was really nice to see.
Yeah, and maybe while we're waiting for other questions in the chat, I'll just say briefly, when I think about this question about structure and form and content from my perspective, it's like I'm always, sort of aware of the fact that the world was not designed with me in mind, and that, it's like I have to find my ways to move through this space that wasn't in fact designed for me in so many ways. And then I said I'm kind of an architectural dilettante. I read some things, right? It's like, but I loved reading back in the 90s. I was quite the fan of Bernard Tschumi. And I loved what he was writing about sort of architecture and disjuncture. And the idea, it's like people use spaces in disjunctive ways where they're always cross-programming the space. It's like that the space is designed to do something, but it's like you use it differently. You make space for yourself in it in a way that is not what the designers intended. And so, yeah, I just think that it's just a great metaphor, not even a metaphor, but like back to questions of method, of like whatever the design is, whatever the structure is, whatever the structure of the curriculum is, whatever the structure of the profession is, it's like there's something about it that was given to you, that you never asked for, that was imposed from the outside. And then how do you find your way to like move through that space in a way that enables you, but is not, necessarily the intention of the designer? Like, how do you figure that out creatively and politically? And then before I shut up, since everybody's talking about Edward Glissant right now, thinking about one of my favorite passages in Poetics of Relation, I thought, oh, that's kind of like a cross-programming use, that he is in that first chapter in Poetics of Relation. It's like he's sort of imagining like a different way of thinking about the Black Atlantic, and he's like thinking about, say, like the belly of the slave ship, and what is it that survives that, and how can you in some ways reimagine that space. And he ends that first chapter by like thinking of a different set of people in a boat on a sea, and he says it's like our boats are open and we sail them for everyone, and just like that sense of like taking the space that was given to you and radically transforming it through a different vision of sociality. It's like, to me, that is just one of the most important things that we can do. And I hadn't really been thinking about Glissant in a spatial sense before listening to this conversation. So I just want to thank everybody who was name checking him.
Crystal.
Hey, can you hear me? No, I didn't really have a follow-up to that last comment particularly, but I guess I wanted to say in general that like I'm really was really happy and excited for like the week of events. It felt like very carefully curated, and it also felt like there was something for everybody who felt unrepresented in one way or the other. I'm sure there's more that we could be doing, but like even just as a base, I thought it was really great. And I think something important I took away from this was I remember, because I was a part of the Erase the Narrative interviews, and I remember when I watched the video, there was this, like all types of views were presented, right? Like even views I didn't agree with necessarily. And something that Britt said actually quite resonated with me, that this like series of conversations is not necessarily about having a singular end to it all, or a singular approach to it all, but just the fact that everybody can have their opinion and their views and their ideas, even if it differs within their own race and what they're doing and thinking. and that it can all be, okay, and still push things forward and move things forward in a very great way. And just like I already knew that at the base of everything, you definitely need to include the people that are affected, but most importantly, you need to hear from the people that are affected by these things, because they are by and large, an expert in what they're experiencing. And I think these series of conversations were just great for, demonstrating that. There's only so much that you can do when you're outside of it. There's only so much you can read, and then there's what the people who are in it are going through, which is definitely different from some sort of textbook idea of what that looks like. So yeah, that was me.
Are there others that would like to contribute?
I guess I can give a meandering response to Joffrey's reference earlier, just that like, I think I've been struck a few times just by references to, I guess, Mr. Stryker put it well, I think the first time she offered a response, just like the friction, finding some kind of friction within an institution, within an environment, within a certain way of doing things. And this idea that like maybe curricula for architecture students should be more open. I'm not sure if we would have done this, like if we had the option to do it within an institutional framework that left the room for us to bring these kinds of topics to the table, I'm not sure it would have happened. And I think that's kind of one of the funny consequences of a subversive approach, is that I don't think, once we've learned that, it's an option to misuse either a pedagogy or a place or an object or whatever, it's hard to not want to do that constantly. So I'm hoping that means that we'll constantly be taking, the avant-garde or the most progressive stance that we can, either in school or after we leave, because I mean, I'll just pay flattery to Penn and Benson as well, that like, organizing this kind of stuff outside of class isn't, especially for architecture students who devote absurd numbers of hours to doing something that's given to them, a task that's explicitly defined. It's not always intuitive. And yeah, I'm glad that I was able to participate in the project. And I'm really happy to have heard the discussion so far. I mean, you can try an open set of classes. I don't know how that'll go.
I mean, one thing that raises to me, and I keep thinking about systemic change versus, say, more say tactical, and thinking about, as an educator, like I want every student to engage these topics. I want it. So I hear what you're saying about there's some strength in, or some inherent value in being able to push back or resist or counter. But I also wonder about the ability for larger scale engagement within these kinds of systems. So, when it was mentioned about the alternative to the curriculum, that kind of gave me made a red flag go off, because it still remains other, it still remains outside. And how do we think about larger kind of infrastructural change within the methods that you've set up? Can that be possible? What are the potentials of those ways of engaging that may not be, say, as incremental? And maybe that's not, and maybe I just want a whole radical change. I mean, I do want a whole radical change, but this conversation and the work over this week has made me think about, as one of the educators here, how can we do this in ways that impact the whole community? That may not be your goal, but it's definitely my goal.
To follow up on that, I'm sorry my camera is not on. I'm in the middle of a demolition and I won't turn it on because we're amongst architects and they're going to tell me you need more structure. I'm not going to do it. Anyway, I am so appreciative of the conversation that has taken course over the week. And it's been so enlightening to have conversations with our students where they're engaging conversations beyond design builds. We're talking about politics and culture and influence and infrastructure and all these things and how can they embrace community a bit more. And so I want to thank Penn and Benson for creating that platform for first and second, third year students, thesis students. I think the work that you all have done is really incredible. I also think that if this was a studio, I don't think the experimentation would have happened. I'm not sure that students would have felt maybe a sense of liberation to feel free to have the conversations or the hard conversations without someone kind of putting an agenda on it. So I wonder if there's like an alternative of a design studio where it's a little bit open-ended, where we give guidance, but it's not so much of a top-down design studio setting. But I just want to compliment the work that's come out of this. I think it's really fantastic intersection between, hard conversations that I think that the younger students don't yet know how to have, but I think that you all are allowing engagement and an opportunity for them to have those difficult discussions. So bravo to all of you for facilitating that.
So DJ.
Hello and good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Just jump straight into my first statement and something that I really kind of took to what Jonathan Jackson had stated earlier about, this kind of artist, and rage. And that's something that I've, in the midst of everything that's been going on, I've been dealing with and, really just learning from a kind of not just architectural perspective, but as a designer, how is with everything that's happened and I'm internalizing and, dealing with my own, mental health, how is this coming out, in my work? What is being shown in design unconsciously just because I'm in a state right now. And that's honestly rage. I'm not just frustrated within what's happening within my community, but I hate bullies. I don't like to see people picked on. I don't like to see people discriminated against. All of these, adjectives to describe, a group that's, how we say, underrepresented. But at the end of the day, that pushes a person to a point of frustration and then that numbness and then frustration again. And ultimately it becomes a sense of rage. And as a designer, I really want to, just kind of ask the question to the not to the curators, but to the panelists in that perspective of, how do you control what comes out when you create from a space of rage? And the kind of precedent that I want to just put out is something that Billie Holiday, she made the song, Strange Fruit. And it was something that she was passionate about. She was a singer, she was a songwriter. And that song is famous. But it was also, to a lot of people and to those that oppressed, it was hated. But that was her craft, and that's how she expressed the rage that she felt. But what happens when we get that moment, and that's what we're creating?
If I may, it's a choice. So and I talked about it more in depth on Monday, right? As a Black female attorney, I described going to rural areas, right? And dealing with situations where a lot is going on with politics outside of you. And I think as a professional, I think as someone who provides services and you provide a voice and you provide just inspiration to younger Black boys, just in general, I think what you have to do is first, you have to make a decision on how you're going to walk through this life. I made a decision a long time ago, when I felt as though I wanted to make a comment in my closing arguments about what's going on politically, I would. And I would say that comfortability depends on who you are. But I think one of the things of being disciplined, of working through your personal issues, working with your mental health, and finally being given the honor of being a professional is not to mute yourself. We don't live this life just to be pleasing to others. You have to go home at night and you have to deal with yourself. And one of the things about being true to yourself and being a true professional is that you represent a lot of people. So in doing that, and dealing with your rage, acknowledge it. And the other thing that I said the other day is we don't have to be perfect. You don't have to always say it perfectly. You don't have to always be creme de la creme. You are human. And I think that when you have the training to produce an excellent work, just like Jonathan Jackson produced something that expressed himself, right? That gave him some sort of relief, that this is my signature mark on this carpet, on this thing that is mundane to you, but it will always speak to me for the message that I gave. You have that opportunity to always do it. I'm not saying do what Jonathan Jackson does, but always be true to yourself, because when everyone goes away, right, and you're dealing with the semantics of society and the pressures that we have, feeling like you're not being heard, feeling like you're being marginalized, that's the last thing you have is your voice. And it's the most, controversial thing you can do, right? It's the most aggressive thing you can do, the angry thing you can do, all of those adjectives or whatever that we talked about on Monday, but it's still you. And as we breathe and as we try to excel and be the best that we can be, you have a right to express yourself.
I'll just jump in and say, I always think of rage as like the lowest gear that you have for getting your work done. It's like your rage gets transformed through your work and how it like finds its way out into the world. But it's like feeling rage about like the injustices of the world and how they land on you and yours is like, I think is a great place to start your work from, and that it's a very powerful place to work from. So it's like, rage can be channeled, but I think shouldn't be disavowed.
I like the lowest gear. I'm going to hold that and take it forward. It sounds totally right.
I'll give you one more version of that, which is, I'm sitting here trying to find the reference because I've forgotten the author's name, but in the book Empires of Vision, that's edited by Martin J. and Sumathi Ramaswamy, there's an author in there who talks about learning how to hate with precision, learning how to, through analysis, through a kind of developing a kind of an eye for learning how to hate capital, learning how to hate racism, learning how to hate bigotry. There's a way in which one begins to channel that rage in a manner that has focus, that has precision, and that it becomes a hate that one performs. There are things in the world that are worth hating. There are things in the world that are deserving of that anger and that rage. And so I've always been attracted to the idea of learning how to hate with precision, learning how to hate in a way that other people learn from.
As a side note, Brick, can you help me write something? Because that last line resonated with me and I need to write something really important soon. So I will contact you.
You know where to find me.
I guess one thing I've been thinking about for a little bit, and I imagine it's tangentially related to the previous question, is just like, I don't think most of our projects really echoed or expressed a ton of rage in particular. I think out of any of them, maybe Erased from the Narrative was closer than ours. Maybe Penn and Benson's work on Body and Space presents like a more concerted attempt to provide a solution or a critique through offering something like an object, a design. Whereas Ife and I, our groups were more focused on just asking questions, on like listening. And I'm curious because that's, for me, that was one of the strangest things about being involved in this project, is that it's not common to just spend a lot of time listening, from my experience, going through design school, or just feeling this pressure to attack, to express something, whether that's anger or dissatisfaction, or to critique. And I'm just curious from all the people that are here, how they balance those things, like the time spent listening and being disorientated and accepting, like a lot of the people we spoke to in our project, that you don't know anything, and sometimes it's either okay or it's worth just spending a while thinking about it versus leaping into action, challenging a system, taking that friction and using it to light a fire.
Could I offer a response in just the conversation to what you stated, Bryce? I'm a person that really not only kind of lives by example, but I don't mind being an example for a greater cause or a good, something bigger than myself. So in expression, and we're talking about just expression through this kind of, frustration and rage. I know throughout this past year, I've exhibited moments within myself that are that have been out of character. We all have them, but even to persons that are, I would presume to be, close to me, in a sense, to where I've had to look back, digest, whether I was right or wrong, in cases where I was wrong, and be willing to say, you know what, DJ, you were wrong about their situation or their circumstance and how I dealt with it, understanding that I'm trying to internalize and take in and be an expressive person, because we are expressive beings, but still understand when I'm in error and I've made an error, and to that point, being that example is saying, hey, look, if I've been, in a sense, wrong, or I've wronged you, apologize and offer an apology in open court, be vulnerable in open court to say, hey, I apologize for what I've done. If I wronged you, it wasn't my intention. I'm coming from a place, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't mean to say that. Nonetheless, I'm going to move past to get to a next phase or next stage, because I'm in this place or this state of rage. That was an example of just being an example, and you learn from that moment of vulnerability because you're also at rage with yourself. So that feeling is something that I also embrace and just trying to cope with, and move forward. I hope that answers the question.
If I may, because I'm not an architect, but I'd say, Bryce, that one of the things when you're dealing and you want to be an expert and you want to perfect things and you want things to come out nice, but at the same time you want to have that freedom of expression, so you take time to really be able to, like you said, have that non-structured time where you can just let your mind wander and consider things. You really have to make it a priority. I think that it's part of being creative. I have to be creative sometimes in the way that I approach some cases, and I will leave and I make it a priority to take a weekend by myself if I know I have a 2 or 3 day trial, right? So if you have a really big project or something and you really want to delve and take some time to do some unstructured things, it has to be a priority, and you have to allow yourself that creative time to rest your brain and get yourself out of the rat race. So I would just encourage you to make it a priority. It's a priority to let your creative juices flow, just as it's a priority to get the project done. And that's something that you'll find with experience. You can't just pull genius out of me every day. You have to see nature. You have to see, you know, do some sort of project, go to a soup kitchen, whatever it is that rejuvenates you and makes you more sound to who you are. And it's a priority as a professional.
I might just add one thing. TJ, I think it's a great question, and maybe I'm not the best person to answer it, but I dropped a link in the chat, this book by the author Xian Ngai, Ugly Feelings. And one of the things that I really liked about this book when I encountered it was to think about things that occur, like feelings that occur before rage. So part of the kind of contention of the book is that there's a kind of catharsis we associate with rage, where it's like this kind of like free expression of something that feels very like deep and instinctual and all of these things. But there are a lot of other feelings that we might track that lead up to it that also may not like kind of hold that same degree of catharsis, but that might still motivate us as designers and makers and creators. And I think that, like, you know, knowing what to do in a situation of rage is also kind of predicated on knowing what to do in more minor situations that lead up to it, and how those can actually create a spectrum of creative practice instead of a kind of binary between, like, you know, a kind of calm state and an enraged state. And I think, I don't know, I don't have much more to say beyond that, but it was a very helpful book to me at a time when I actually kind of only knew those two forms of operating between like the normal and the kind of furious. So maybe that could help you too.
Fred Morton has a book, Undercommons, and in it, he was saying that, you know, everybody says that you have to get into the institution and you have to fight from within, but that's just so tiring. And I just wish that I was in it and for it. And I totally agree. You know, like, why do we have to be in the institution just to fight against it? So, you know, but then we are in institutions one way or the other, whether that's capitalism or the group that we make like this. And if you can make a group so that you can be for it and then work with it, I think it'll allow us to deal and channel the rage in a productive way, even though, again, it's really difficult. And Foucault also said that we are all governed, and because of that, we are in solidarity. So it's not the so you can have a rage and you can't let it govern us, but then at the same time, we cannot avoid being governed. So we have to we have to govern ourselves, I guess, with that rage.
Well, and I'll add to that rage doesn't always have to be negative. Rage can be passionate, it can be exciting, it can be a movement. And so I would say, let's be provocative in the way that we have these conversations, and explain to others that rage or I'm mad or other doesn't mean negative. It means that we are here for a common cause. We're here to move forward. And so how can we do that collectively? Obviously, collective, we can get much more accomplished. And so I just want to say that rage, I think we have to redefine what rage actually means in the conversations that we have.
There's, if people are willing, there was one more question that would like to be posed by Indra or comment, not sure.
I think it's less of a question and more of asking for tips. So I think that we're lucky here that we are able to have kind of like a cross-pollination of experiences and ideas and backgrounds that I can't help to think that we're pretty much very lucky and privileged enough to be in a circle or like in a situation where we're allowed to do that in a safe environment and also in a very productive environment. But as Bryce, Daria, and I were interviewing fellow students and also alums, we realized that is not always the case, especially when you're like graduating, that for some of our friends who just recently graduated, they found themselves not only in the pandemic where they're not allowed to actually meet new people, but they were stuck in workplaces where it was more heteronormative than they were used to in the bubble that is the university. And I guess we would love to continue these types of conversations, but I guess what we want to ask is then how do we start, how to start, especially when worst case scenario, we're actually stuck in a place where it doesn't actually allow us to do so.
I will say, as people are still formulating thoughts, that one silver lining in the last year has been, although both positive and negative, is Zoom. And it's allowed me to be able to connect with a wide array of people to build and continue to develop my own support systems, both intellectually, emotionally. And so I think that is one way that this has allowed those support systems to remain active and thrive in some ways, not in all. I know, of course, it's in many ways much better to be in person and the energy you collect with people. But I think, especially if you're in locations where you don't have a large community, if any at all, there is the virtual platform that becomes a support system itself, and in some ways is completely open globally. So it actually becomes even more, there's more potential of extending and meeting people around the world. So I think that in one way is in response to how do you create networks and create events, online events that are thriving. And I hope we'll continue to do so once we're on the other side of the pandemic.
I mean, if I can just chime in.
I don't know. I think.
Go ahead, Crystal.
No, I guess I was just gonna say that I feel in a way I can highly identify with what Angel is trying to say. Obviously not from the queer lens, but more from a Black woman lens. Like I can correlate it to certain experiences. Because recently I went to a JIA meeting, which stands for the Jamaica Institute of Architects. And Jamaica is a predominantly Black country, so issues regarding racism isn't necessarily what's there. It's more so having to do with classism and colorism, right? And misogyny, patriarchy, that's like rampant due to the culture. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I was witnessing this girl trying to express her experiences as a Jamaican woman in this space culturally, and her struggling to be listened to was just really breaking for me, because she was doing it from a research-based perspective, right? And I remember I was kind of angry because in the moment while I was watching this presentation, I was just like, girl, why you don't say these things with your chest? You know, like if the data and the research you've done shows that, you know, men are gatekeeping the profession in Jamaica, you don't need to try and make them feel comfortable about that. It is what it is, and they need to fix it. But then the next thing I realized in that moment was that, like, what do you decide to be when you're trying to change a space? Which I think is what Indra is asking. If you're in a work environment or a workspace that's not open to who you are or not open to change, do you decide to be a martyr and upset the space and say it with your chest? Or do you try to be calculated and undercover and deliberate in infiltrating the space to making them be more open? And I feel like that's kind of what Indra is trying to ask, like, how do you change a work environment that doesn't necessarily support you? But at the same time, you need money. You got to work. You know what I mean? And it's a pandemic. So like, I really get it. And it's like a hard place to be in, because like what you decide to be also is partially dependent on your personality. And it's also dependent on, you know, can you afford to do it? Most of the time, the people who can afford to do these things, they have resources behind them. You know, they might be in a space that's not conducive to them, and they might not need the job per se. So if they become that martyr, you know, I hope you get what I'm saying, but I feel like I can empathize with Indra's position. Like, what direction do you go, you know, in a space that's not as open to you? Yeah.
I was wondering if Indra, you would be able to like respond to that, just to make sure my comment are along, like on the same trajectory of what you were asking.
I think it touches upon it, but also expands upon it, because I think Crystal was very deliberate about like being a martyr, and then like being actually, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of like a clandestinely, like actually destroying the the structures that are like subjugating us, and so on and so forth. I think I know which ones I am, and I know you know which one you are. But yeah, I think it's like, how do we operate, and also where do we start, and but also, yeah, I think like Crystal mentions that, yeah, we have to kind of like look up for ourselves too, because we have to survive too, and in a sense that we can be the change, but it's not up to us 100%. It's that you have to know exactly how much you have to know your own capacity to do so.
And if I can just like say a few words in regards to that, going back to how and considering the restrictions that we now have, I think for us, if anyone has seen some of the stuff we have done, we've always been proactive in the making process, and even now with the project that we did, we figure a way to do it even though we couldn't physically meet with each other. So upon last year when the pandemic happened, it was simply just trying to imagine how do we continue that same sort of momentum that was built up within those limitations. And honestly, at the moment, we thought it was almost like, I mean, I thought she loved it, that there was no more going to actual school. I was really distraught. Like I was hurt because I couldn't actually do the things I wanted to do. Like Professor Eversole mentioned a comment one time where it would be nice to just dress the whole building with drawings, even though no one can see it, just so we can wonder and still have that some experience. I used to put so much value into the physical space of being and not the actual people that were in the space. So it was more about the accessibility to get the equipment, the accessibility to have the large room, the table, and not understanding the value in the fact that like just being able to bounce ideas off each other was so productive, and be able to walk up to the fourth floor studio, third floor studio, and just have these sort of improv conversations. So a big part of what we were after in terms of this project was to be like, well, how do we still take that back? And then what seemed as a restriction became a wonderful opportunity in itself, because now I don't have to put somebody up in a hotel. I don't have to worry about in 5 minutes when you get off this call, you can just go back to whatever you were doing, and you don't have to worry about driving. You don't have to. So like, for
like Ife is like calling in from Nigeria, like many people of who are working on this project are like in different parts of the world.
So what seemed as a limitation is actually a great opportunity. So in saying like how, we were hoping that the process of going through this project and being able to like meet on Zoom every weekend like we did, you know, go back and forth and argue and discuss and say, I don't like this, don't like that, still brought back some of those same experiences that we felt being in the studio. Because the one thing that we noticed about Zoom is sometimes we'll jump on the call and we won't even talk about the project. We'll just gossip about something that didn't matter. And for some reason, that was the one of the main thing that I realized that I didn't appreciate when I was in the space, was more of the people. So you still have accessibility to people from, I mean, what I'm saying is from that, like now in this moment, is actually, there's many ways that you can be productive because it's no longer, the proximity in space no longer limited by me getting into a car, getting into a bus, worrying about the weather, is I can just click a button and log in. So the how now is actually a little bit more easier, going back to Professor Brown's comment. And we were just hoping that the whole experience of this project and the fact that we were able to make physical things, and some of the images you saw, some of the videos, we had to actually go film them on site, offer some sort of like vignettes to then still be able to facilitate the same sort of things that we lost from not being in the studio anymore. And I think that's all I have to say.
If no one has any additional comments, I would like to end the last day of our long symposium. So thank you everyone again, students, faculty, parents, and other guests for participating in our event. Yeah, siblings. Again. So lastly, please everyone look forward to our exhibition of artwork as in the form of projections on the Everson Museum, which will happen from May 2nd to May 5th. So
I want to say one more thing, and that's mainly because of the professors in this room, and the fact that you guys have lended so much of your time, and Professor Sho, I love you. I love Professor Brown, you've been amazing.
Thank you,
Great Eversol, and even Dean Speaks for even funding our process since the beginning. And it's hard to imagine, as we talk about the fact that there's a system, right? And it's been set up, and the people that are involved in the system are just almost players within it. And it doesn't necessarily reflect their personal, or even the right word I'm looking for, their personal feelings, or we are part, and we are stuck in this stage, and we're still playing all these roles. So I encourage anybody who has any questions, who has any different ideas and fit the standards, to reach out to them, because from our experience, we've noticed how open they've been to just our feedback. There's some little pushback, don't do this, it doesn't work, but they are, if you are thinking about doing it for yourself, just ask, open your mouth and just try, and get comfortable with that, with working a lot.
yes, after party.
I don't want to forget the teams either.
Thank you everyone who were on the team.
So I think that's
thank you,
really,
thank you Ife for helping with everything.
Yeah, just reach out and ask, because they are willing to help you. Just being, they will try, even if sometimes they can't relate, you know. That's all I have to say.
All right. Well, thank you for the incredible panel that you've put together over the week. It's been really exciting to engage with everyone, and next year I would love to be in person with everyone. We'll host you at the firehouse.
We are graduating, so bye.
Thank you so much, Pin and Benson. Like, I think everyone that has been a part of this has been just so grateful for your guys' efforts. Like, I don't think I've ever been so proud to be a Syracuse student. I'm not a very like go Orange person, but I think that this scenario has made it like just given so much power to the students. Like I think that like you've really made the school feel like the school. And yeah, you'd think that the living room conversation is even more contradictive, but this has been incredible and so intimate and lovely.
Thank you, Lainey. Both our parents were Syracuse alum.